these ideas are not specific even just to when you are learning how to communicate and show up better for your neurodivergent loved ones, right? Like these are just how we should connect as humans with one another.
I tell people all the time that the one thing that I like the most in the DSM is with autism, it talks about support needs. Except the problem is, I think it's not just autistic folks that have them. All humans have support needs. And the better that we understand each other's support needs across the board, every relationship would be a little bit better if we understand our own and if we can communicate those to others.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Shafer, your host of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, publisher, and I am passionate about using storytelling as a tool to help you reclaim your story so that you can build your most beautiful future. And today, I'm so pleased to be joined by our special guest, Sam Marion. Sam is a licensed clinical social worker, and he is the author of the beautiful book, Embracing All Brains. He also is a consultant, speaker, content creator, and he is a multiply divergent individual who spreads the word of awareness and affirmations for people who do have neurodivergence of all types. Thank you so much, Sam, for being here. I can't wait to have this conversation with you.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so pleased, and I know that our audience is going to learn so much. So tell me, what made you from the beginning go into the field that you're in?
So that's a journey. The field of social work for me, I have a family history. I have multiple family members that are social workers. So at different times in life, I was sort of drawn to it or no, I'm going to resist it because it's in my family. And I think that's pretty common. And I was trying to figure out what am I going to do in my life. And that's actually the day I was working for a treatment center for drug and alcohol in patient transportation. And I would pick people up at a short-term facility and I would drive them sometimes 4 or 5 hours to a long-term center. And I just spent a few hours in a car with a guy who's having a tough time in life. And he said, I just appreciate the way you listen to me. And that day I thought, I think this is what I want to do with my life. And headed to grad school within the next couple of years and headed into, actually, I thought I was going to be in the treatment world, drug, alcohol treatment primarily, really thinking I was on a path towards hospital management. And I've got a family history of hospital leadership. And I was on that path. I started out in direct care, jumped up pretty quick into leadership. I was at a place where I was director of admissions for a treatment center, 350 inpatient admissions a month. I was in charge of this 24/7 department. I thought I had made it in the world. I had a bonus structure. I reported to the CEO, and I was miserable. My life was about spreadsheets and metrics. And at some point, I realized every time I meet all these goals to get my little bonus, my boss gets a big bonus, and I feel bad about the patient care. And I pivoted hard back into direct care. When I'd been in direct care, I'd been a trauma therapist. And I went back into that, opened a private practice within a few months. Small town, South Georgia. My career path was private practice with an emphasis on trauma. I did a lot of play therapy training. I was in a small town where my business partner and I, we were the only 2 full-time therapists in town. So truly worked with everybody. Because if I turned somebody away, we were saying, okay, you may have walked a mile truly to my office, but now you have to find a ride to get 30, 45, or 60 miles to maybe get help somewhere else. So that's what I did. Pandemic hit. And after a while, I actually took a job and my family moved from South Georgia to North Georgia. And I took a job with the state, full-time trauma therapy for first responders because it felt good to have some stability. And then I went back into private practice about 2 years ago. And in that time is when I started having neurodivergence hit my radar. And I started slowly making this shift from being a trauma therapist exclusively into supporting this idea of neurodiversity. I started learning more and more about autism specifically at that point. There's some reasons why I hit my radar. And I tell people, and it was early fall, August, September of probably August of 2022, that I looked at my own therapist that I had sort of stumbled in her office. Long story, how I got lucky there. And I said, hey, I'm autistic, right? And she's like, yeah. And almost this casual little like back and forth. because I'd been learning all about it to support some people in my life. Um, and I just realized a couple of things. One, everything I'm reading resonates in my own experience of life.
Mm.
But two, it is infuriating because everything that I would read or every video I'd watch, almost all of it was this deficit perspective. And so it's hard for me to connect with it because I didn't like hearing somebody talk about traits that I have, but in such a negative way. Yes, I'm aware these traits can be challenging to live with because I live with them. But I didn't like the constant negativity and the desire that so many people had to make somebody essentially not autistic. That didn't resonate for me. And so for the last almost 2 years now, I have just gotten deeper and deeper into neurodivergent affirming support. I work with a lot of autistic folks, from kids as young as like 5 up to adults in their 60s who are autistic, of varying levels of support. I have ADHD folks I work with. I frequently say if I work with one person in the family, I tend to work with the whole family. Because it impacts the whole family. The experiences, what's happening at home. So I tend to take on kind of a whole family when I do work with folks in different capacities. I like working with organizations, different other professions. I want everybody to understand that we can view people from this old deficit perspective, or we can see differences and we can support the differences, and we can support these very real support needs that humans have just through the human experience. And I want us to show up like that.
I love that. I love the words you use, the deficit versus difference. And that's what it boils down to. And I wonder if a part of the mislabeling or the misunderstanding is in part because people didn't necessarily have someone with neurodivergence of all levels of the spectrum represented in their lives. And so they have these misinformed ideas about what it means. And now it's so exciting, places like here on our show and other shows, and on in avenues like TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, where it's really easy to get content out there where people can just share their stories. And you realize how many people are full of incredible examples that we can learn from. And they've been dealing with these challenges their whole lives. They never had a diagnosis, maybe because of some misconceptions their parents had and didn't want to get them evaluated, or maybe they saw the behavior as bad instead of a part of who they are that they needed to learn to accommodate. So now we have all of this information, and I wonder what it's going to look like in 5-10 years if we were having a conversation like this, if it would be as necessary to try to convince people to focus on affirmations, or if in part, once we recognize and we affirm each other as a part of society, then it will just become very normal that this isn't an abnormality. It's a normal part of the human condition.
I think we're going to see a lot of research in the next 5 to 10 years, because right now, as we take these shifts of perspective, any research, it's mostly just emerging, right? We've not been studying how to support different folks from this affirming perspective for very long. And so to have longevity 5 to 10 years from now, I do think we're going to see different, study results. When I work with a family and, I'm looking at a young person and saying, yeah, this is the way things are being talked about right now, how to support your 17-year-old. But we won't have the research to fully support this until this 17-year-old is an adult. That's a very real thing. So I do think, 5 to 10 years out, there's so much of the body research has been as deficit-based perspective. And so, we have research that can show that behavioral interventions are effective at changing a behavior. We have decades of that. But until recently, nobody asked the question, what's the mental health impact of these behavioral interventions on this individual? And then we start to learn recently, this is not good. This frequently has a negative impact on the individual. So yes, we change the behavior, but at what cost? So now we're looking much more, and what I encourage people towards is looking at nervous system regulation. It's where
Mm.
I tell people when I pivoted from being all focused on being a trauma therapist into my work, supporting neurodivergent people, I changed very little. Nothing, truly nothing about my office changed.
Yeah.
Where I'm recording
Yeah.
this on the other side of the wall is where I meet with people in person, and I changed nothing. It was already set up to be very
Mm.
flexible, where I always give people choices. I could have it really bright overhead lights on, or I generally though I have 4 lamps around my office with some windows, natural
Mm.
light, and a couple small lamps tends to work. But I can flex that. If somebody comes in if they need something different. That works well in trauma therapy. That works well in supporting neurodivergent folks. When I say neurodivergent, I mean this can be an autistic person, an ADHD person, someone with who's coming in highly depressed, who's experiencing a lot of anxiety. That flexibility and support for who they are right then, their needs in that moment, it works across the board.
Mm. That's amazing. I'm so glad that you're providing that safe space. And I want to focus in on the fact that you're doing it not only for the patient, the client, but you're also doing it for the family. Because I think when you're talking about regulation and you're talking about if someone comes in and they're like, my kid has this problem, oftentimes the thing that really needs to be regulated is our response to the stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
And when you leave the parents or the caregivers out of that equation, you're not necessarily going to get very far because again, you're trying to quote unquote fix what you are seeing with this child, but really the real problem is often the response to it, the reaction. And once we work towards regulating our responses, everything can go so much more smoothly and create a harmony where then everyone's a bit more able to cope and just be themselves.
I get a lot of requests for new clients, phone calls, uh, especially here in Georgia and in the Atlanta area. My name gets tossed around a
Yeah.
lot in PDA circles, and I'm happy to talk about that in a
Mm,
moment. It's a subtype
yeah.
or proposed subtype of autism, uh, but it has to do with a lot of dysregulation. And so I get a lot of these calls where the parents are basically saying, "We don't know what we need, but we are struggling. Can you help our child?" And
Mm,
I say, yeah, I can help your kid. Sure. You can bring your kid in my office. But if they spend an hour in my office with me every week or every other week, they still spend so much more time with you, mom and dad, or parents, or whoever,
mm,
the guardians. Every family may look a little different there. So let's spend more time with me and engage with y'all, not so much with the kid. And frequently, by the time somebody gets to my office, that child already knows a lot of other professionals. And so when I say let's not add one more professional to your child's life until it's
mm,
needed, and that almost always gets buy-in from the family. Yes, we do need help, and
yeah.
if you're telling me that this can help, so we do talk about regulation. We talk about certain kind of situations that they may encounter that may be really frustrating. And other strategies for it. Sometimes it does just take more planning ahead. It takes
Mm,
adjusting plans. It takes, recognizing, all right, I think my kid's done. I think maybe that Christmas gathering that's from 9:30 until 4:30. Maybe that just we show up for lunch, kind of thing.
mm,
And we don't try to stay for 7 hours. Um, we show up from like 11 to 1, and that's okay. There's different kind of plans that we can and we look at sensory stuff. I just walked through a lot with the parents that they had never considered. Even families
mm,
who've gotten a lot of support, but it's been much more traditional support, behavior interventions. When we start walking through that with the family, and they do realize, yeah, you know what, this did work when I shifted this approach with all of my children, not just the one I called you about. Uh,
yeah.
they all appreciated me being intentional about building in a little bit of quiet time or a little bit of, I may call it reset time, kind of a let's all just take a few minutes and then we'll do this next activity. We're just going to reset for a minute. Listen to
Mm.
some music in the car. Let's not chat or whatever it may be. It works for that family, but everybody benefits.
Oh, I love that. I love taking that opportunity to connect with the families and make sure you're doing it in a non-shaming way, which clearly is your approach. It's educational, and once they know better, they will do better. They just didn't even know that the problem wasn't always external, that they had some power. And I think, sometimes we may hesitate to give that feedback, but if we do it in a loving and connecting way, it's not critical feedback, it's empowerment. It's saying, hey, guess what? You have tools that you never even knew you had, and let me teach you how to use them. And I think it's amazing that you work with families to empower them in that way.
I mentioned sensory challenges, which honestly, in the DSM, which is where all the diagnoses come from, sensory stuff only actually shows up as one little part of autism. But if you've ever been
Mm.
around any young people or adults who are experiencing ADHD, or so many different anxiety, something like that, uh, sensory differences show up so often. We just don't talk about it enough. But when I start talking through, there's at least 8 sensory systems. We learn kind of the 5 in school, but there's at least 8, if not 9 or more. And I start walking through that. That gives some pretty immediate action steps. And if you're desperate because your family is struggling, and then you have a concrete action step at all, you feel a little bit of hope. And then when you try something a little bit different, that was a pretty easy action step, and you had some success, the amount of hope a family can get when they show up so hopeless or struggling so much can go a long way. Uh, and it happens consistently. And unfortunately, I don't think these are things we talk about enough as mental health practitioners. I actually had a conversation with another therapist not long ago, essentially about how many things we do with clients that are not things we learned in school or talked about often, but they're little things that find success.
Mm. Yeah. And pointing those successes out, championing them and saying, "Oh, look, there's this data point. So you can do this." And then the next time that helps buoy them through the next challenging time and maybe catapults them into their next success.
That's right. No, progress, not perfection. And any little win is a big win. And people feel it, and encouraging it can give a lot of energy towards building on that little bit by little bit.
Yeah, I love that and that message of encouragement. You have spoken on your channels about some thoughts you have about the way we educate and the way we don't always necessarily affirm and we don't always encourage because, again, you're in this big school system setting where you're trying to get people through and follow a certain pattern. If you have someone that can't fit into that pattern, punishing them isn't going to fix that situation. And you talk about this a lot. Can you share with us your thoughts on that and how we can do better by our students who have neurodivergent traits to help them succeed?
You know, I I frame this oftentimes through the lens of like I'm a therapist in private practice is my full time job, and outside of 15 to 20 minutes of recess, that once or twice a week of PE, I move
Mm.
more during the day than a lot of elementary age children are allowed to.
Mm.
And there's a lot of, I think, aspects to a school environment that are not reflective of sort of real life. Some people push back. We shouldn't support people because, you got to set them up for the real world, and kids are living in the real world. And in many ways, school is harder because there's so
Mm.
many supports that I can have. I can keep a to-do list on my phone that goes with me all the time. It is when the arms reach, even when I'm asleep. So if I wake up at 3 a.m., I can add to my to-do list. We don't let children have that same support. So when we
Mm.
talk about supports for kids and things like that in school, one thing I think we do, what do we do as adults already on our own to support ourselves, but we don't allow children to do this on their own or adolescents on their own in the same way. We don't model it in the same way. And so even just starting there, I think we have to acknowledge that we have expectations of kids across the board that many adults don't experience. Now, there's some reasons why I work in an environment that I work in where I work alone, things like that. It does suit my needs better. But in a
Mm.
school environment, you know, I understand some of the perspectives of, well, a teacher has 20, 25, 30 kids in their class, more in some schools. And so how can they, make everything unique for each child, things like that? Okay, I can hear that. Same time, I think increasingly there's technology that can help a teacher give options for assignments that give each learner the ability to kind of choose what may be the best fit for them. But then we talk about supports based off identified needs. Some of the pushback that continues to happen, schools, when I was in college a couple of decades ago, I had services through Disability Resource Center, and the accommodations that were offered to me were this standard. Here's the list. Extended time on test. I had a note taker if I'd wanted it. There was this list of things that are still the standard. Here's what we offer a child if they need supports, but they don't always make sense for the kids that are offered some of these things. I've looked at IEPs and 504 plans, and they don't make sense for the child. They're just the standard. This is what we offer. And then when families end up pushing back, say, no, this is what my child needs, it gets really difficult. And sometimes it's because schools don't feel like it's reasonable. And sometimes it's schools are just going, that's just not how we do it. We take different approaches. So there's just these very real different tensions that I think do exist. And, over time, hopefully, schools will continue to educate themselves, and school personnel will, and they will, open up some of their perspectives. We can acknowledge that what I learned in school is not the way I operate now. And, what I learned about neurodivergence, things like that, neurodiversity, I didn't learn that word at all, any of these words. But what I learned about autism, ADHD in school is not at all how I approach it today. My assumption is that in your professional training, you didn't learn the way I'm talking about it now through a lot of it. Educators don't, the little bit of education that they get. And so there's this big gap, I think, in understanding that as much as I can get frustrated with approaches that are taken, people are operating with the information that they have. So as it goes back to the research thing, if we're 5 or 10 years away from good research on some of these understandings, then how long will it take for it to truly trickle all the way down into schools and be considered evidence-based approaches? So there's a lot of tension in that space.
Yeah, well, and there's potential, and there is the potential for education, and I so appreciate that you're out there doing that with your reels, which are amazing. Everyone check them out; they're great, and I think they're a great opportunity too for, again, to go back to the representation piece. For if you have a young person who's maybe interested in becoming a therapist and they are, neurodivergent, to see, wow, look at this super successful person and look what they're doing with their voice, right? We all need to see someone that we see ourselves in, and that can just really inspire us and help us feel our worthiness in a way that sometimes we just need, not that external validation, but we just need representation. Because if we're only surrounded by people that we can't feel connected to, we don't feel a sense of belonging, that can be really damaging to us, especially as we are developing. I want to talk about your book and the motivation behind why you wrote it, what your goal is, who your audience is for Embracing All Brains.
So Embracing Our Brains is a 30-day guided journal to become a neurodivergent affirming educator. And I wrote it because I interact with, honestly, a wide range of professionals. And for several years now, I've spoken at a conference. It's a big national educators conference. And I have one parent who's a social worker, one parent who's an educator. And so I find myself comfortable in that space, I think, for that reason. But I recognize what the limited information that is spread around. I think about people go to an IEP meeting, and maybe the director of special education for a school is in that meeting, and they're expected, this one person, to know a whole bunch of laws, a whole bunch of different diagnoses and things like that in order to talk through this, or at least the people in the room are. And, a special education teacher who may have a whole range of presentations in their classroom, much less somebody they're the gen ed teacher in the room, because on IEP, there's a certain list of people who are required to be in the meeting. And so you got a general education teacher who's there, who they're just doing their best. And so I wanted to make information really approachable for everybody. And some of the feedback that I've got from the book is going, hey, you really shouldn't have called the same for educators, because I'm not, and I've loved it. I found out yesterday that a client of mine gave it, to somebody else in their life who was far from being an educator, but is loving the book. Just sort of a friends passing this thing around. They're not educators, but because the information is very approachable, which was the goal, right? It is not in-depth research. It is brief overviews, but with the goal to help each reader go a little bit deeper with their own reflections, their own thoughts. Because we come into this with a bias. If I talk about autism, and I've referenced it a couple times, I bet at least a handful of listeners have pictured either Rain Man or Sheldon Cooper in that moment, because those are sort of the media representations that we have. Or there's someone in their life that they know who would be considered high support needs, but that may not be a full perspective of autism. I challenge people in the book, like, what would it be like for you as an educator to learn from students, but who have these different presentations? It's one thing to learn from a student who's identified gifted. Well, we're already kind of putting them in a different category in kind of the hierarchy in the school. But that in itself is often considered a neurodivergence, giftedness, right? And so this is a slightly different way that the brain may work. And so, it was a fun project that I decided one day that I was going to do that. And honestly, I had like 3-hour block later, a couple of days after I had this, like, I really want to do this thing. And I thought, I'm going to sit down. And if I can make progress in this little block of like outlining a little bit and kind of find any kind of traction, then I'm going to follow through with it. But I'm just going to play with it this week and see what happens. And I had a productive couple hours and thought, okay, I'm going to do it.
Oh, I love that. And I love that forward motion. And as you were describing earlier, your career and how you pivoted and how you grew into the spaces that really were in alignment with your purpose, it was so organic and natural. And then the book happened in the same way. And I would say I love actually hearing you talk about how, well, actually other people other than educators are receiving this book in an impactful way, and I'm getting this feedback that maybe it should be called something different. And then it's question, well, is it that should be called something different, or is it that the next iteration of this is slightly different because it is for parents or is for friends or other loving people in the lives of those with neurodivergence to help them come up with a plan for how they're going to approach things if they are having struggles in their interpersonal relationships that they want to try to work on, right? Just a different opportunity for a different group of people. So I just see potential there.
And very much more books are on the radar. I have some other resources that I'm working on. I'm intentionally carving out time to work on some of that. I'm doing some graduate work right now on executive functioning. So that's on the radar for some resources that I want to make. So that's all there. This is I see these memes that sort of joke about like living with autism and ADHD, sort of both all at play in the brain. And, and you said in the opener that I identify as multiply neurodivergent, and that's autistic, ADHD, gifted. I have a reading disability. I have a facial tic. I show up in all kind of neurodivergent ways. And so, life with this whole mixture of things means that I decide to write a book. And so I just started writing that week. And, frequently people say, well, you're not supposed to just do it like that. And like, well, then you don't understand ADHD well enough. If you think you're not supposed to just like get a thought and start working on it. But I'll circle back around, because that is my intention would be over time to have similar books for different professions. And a lot of it's similar content, but it's examples, right? I wouldn't talk so much about education for parents, but different types of because what I want, and when I speak to an audience, I want my examples to resonate for those in the room. When I speak at an educators conference, it's one thing. If I speak at a conference, people who work in the child abuse space, I'm going to use very different examples.
Well, and I love how, you're talking about the transition from a trauma-based practice to one where you were focusing on helping people and families with neurodivergence. There is some trauma involved in that potentially, depending upon, did this child suffer from trying to be put into a box they didn't fit in, right? Like lop off
Hmm.
pieces of them to fit into this box that's not theirs. Did the parents experience something prior to having this child, prior to trying to learn to parent this child, that they need to recover from, a trauma that they're carrying with them that's affecting how they're parenting, how they're showing up for them? And I think it's an asset to what you do now, having that, being so trauma informed, having that background.
Especially with late identified autistic folks. So people as an adult, like myself, I was, middle aged and I recognized I'm autistic. There's this process that is very, very common of almost reflecting back through life and recognizing, oh, looking at that experience when I was 10, 15, 20, however old, through this lens of understanding that I'm autistic, makes that experience make more sense. And there is this tension, and it can be sort of shocking for people at times. It can be kind of startling, but all kinds of emotions come up. People grieve a childhood that could have been different. When people talk to their parents, perhaps as an adult, tell their parents, "Hey, I understand myself in this way." Parents have different kinds of, or families, significant others. People all have these different kinds of responses, and that in itself can be traumatic as people sort of wrestle through that. And so, yeah, there's a whole range of emotions that I do feel pretty prepared to support people as they navigate through, because there's so many potential, I hate to say pitfalls, but almost, you know, just little pockets where someone may find themselves kind of startled or thrown off when they weren't ready for it.
Right, right. And they're learning how to cope with that because they hadn't been faced with that. And it comes back to a question that bubbles up in my mind about this question of the importance of diagnosis. So what does the diagnosis bring for a child? What does it bring for an adult or a young adult? What are the possible negative things that can happen if you are not diagnosed? Because I think because of some stigma that still may be around these diagnoses, sometimes parents may understand things but not necessarily seek support and seek a diagnosis because they may have some misconceptions about what that diagnosis may mean for the child. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of the pros and cons of that, and where, if you were to try to help lay that out so that people can make an informed decision from your perspective, working with so many families as well as with your own experience, how would you want to present that to them so they can make an informed decision?
So I, I have a different conversation with parents of a child than I have with parents of an adolescent. And that's different than I have with an adult who's considering it, considering kind of pursuing a diagnostic process. Uh, the one consistent part of it is to ask the question of why. Why would you pursue it? And what would you do with this? It's kind of the two questions that are there. Why you want to do it? And what would you do with the results? Um, and, sometimes it's, with an adult, most often it is, well, I just wanted to know. Um, Sometimes it's like, I want to know, but I haven't really thought about what I would do with it. Well, would you ever take it to work? No, I wouldn't take it to work. If you're not working on it, getting any sort of accommodations in a workplace, then, as an adult, do you need an official diagnosis? I know of at least one person out there who um, does autism assessments of adults, and they offer sort of two tiers. Where one, if you just want the assessment part and the little, and here's the results, and another one if you want a full report. They offer kind of that because so many adults just sort of want the objective assessment, and that's all they need. They don't need the documentation. They don't need the full report. Whereas a child, if we go to the other end, parents may need this report to best understand how to get academic supports for a child um, in a way that, like I said, an adult just doesn't need unless they tend to go back to school. And so to understand the nuances of how a person's brain might function in a school setting, what kind of supports that, a child especially may not have the language to explain that they get overstimulated by all the the noise and smells and sound, sounds, all the movement, everything that's happening for a second grader in a school cafeteria, right? Whereas by the time somebody's 40, 45 years old in the workplace, they already are making choices probably that, and they have the freedom, they have the agency, autonomy to make their choice of where they eat lunch. And with a therapist or somebody else can process through watching social media, that adult can get some ideas of like, I'm going to try this a little bit different to see if this meets a need I never realized I had. Whereas the child doesn't have that opportunity. So nor to have the ability to communicate it as much. And so I think parents are in a different place with a small child of, hey, we got a chance to really let this child grow up with a lot of supports around them. And if we're talking about an adolescent, then I think it's real reflection. And then I think the older the person is, the more voice they should have in the matter of, do you pursue it or not? Like, well, would you pursue any accommodations in school? Well, they really do struggle with certain things. Okay, then maybe we do pursue that where you need the documentation. Sometimes if it's specific enough, do they need a full report or do they need a letter from me? Does a therapist, would that be sufficient to say, yeah, they're struggling with this, and here's a recommendation, and the school, is fine with that. So, because some of the drawbacks, yes, there's still very much stigma still exists. There are people who will get a diagnostic report from a psychologist who's done the testing and will say to the family, hey, yes, your child is level 1 autism, and they'll say, like, that's high functioning autism. And that's pretty much what used to be Asperger's. Well, high functioning isn't a thing, and Asperger's is no longer used. This autism spectrum, it's a color spectrum is how we view it. It's a collection of traits. It's a constellation of traits that are all over the place. So many different categories of traits. It's not a high-low spectrum. My example in this, that a person is not high or low functioning. If you ask my high school math teacher if I was high or low functioning, and then you ask my high school English teacher if I was high or low functioning, they would give different answers. And so instead, we say, well, Sam has these certain traits that are here, and these other traits that are here. And so we can view it like that. But when someone gets test results, they spend this money or these hours, and a psychologist says incorrect language. They write in a report incorrect language. They set them up to not understand it. Instead, the language is support need, and you can go right in the school and say, here's the support that my child needs. And it's sort of teed up for you. But there are drawbacks, right? There are real questions. I think of, what happens with laws for adults who hold a diagnosis. And that this isn't just autism. There's a range of diagnoses out there that if you hold this if it's on your official medical record, it may impact some of your rights and some of, your options on things. And we don't know what laws may change in the future to remove rights of people to make certain choices for themselves over time. And so that's where an adult, just to add this to your record, if you're not going to do anything with it, what does that do for you? On the other end of a child, to give them a chance to, throughout life, have different supports in place and could change their future as a result of, having an academic support that they needed versus struggle for 13 years, kindergarten through senior year. And then, we'll see what college looks like if we're going that route or not. These are very different conversations, but these are all perspectives. And I think any clinician who's going to guide a family on this hopefully would bring these questions up a little bit to talk through why might you pursue this or why not? Like, what are you going to do with this if you get a report that has yes to a diagnosis or says no?
Those are excellent examples. And I just love the perspective you bring to that, because I do think, especially in our fast-paced environment and our problem-solving environment, we don't necessarily always stop to think about the why, right? And that the why is going to be so different for every individual, and especially in different times of their life. Like right now, people who are watching, they're old enough to be on TikTok, and they're watching TikTok videos and they're saying, oh my goodness, I see myself in this person. Their why is very different than a young child. So that's a wonderful way to put that for listeners, and hopefully something for them to reflect on if they have someone in their life that is contemplating on this idea. A concept that we've discussed a lot today, the words keep coming up about, autonomy. And when we talk about also when you are coping as a parent with behaviors and you're met with things, with responses to stimuli that maybe you don't know how to cope with, you didn't expect, right? And you're learning how to deal with that, but you feel very controlling. You want to fix the problem, right? So you're trying to control the behavior, but often that leads to the behavior getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Explain to us the kind of situation where we see that happen and how you are trying to reframe how we even speak the words of that diagnosis, essentially, and how we can better address it with our loved ones who are having these reactions.
So, love the question. There are definitely a lot of people, children, adolescents, young adults, older adults, right, who have a really hard time when expectations are placed on them. Demands can lead to big reactions. And there's different reasons for that. Like, there truly are a lot of reasons, I think, at play. But this is sort of also my trauma therapist lens starts to come out here. That what leads to traumatic imprint on us, it kind of leads to us having kind of a fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, is a loss of autonomy, a loss of agency of our bodies. Right? Our bodies are designed for survival. We're designed to maintain control of ourselves. And when we no longer have control of our body, that's when that threat response gets activated. And so sometimes that doesn't get activated for somebody until they truly, they're physically restrained level of feeling loss of autonomy. And other people, it feels sort of like you're not getting to make as many choices as you would like to. And that can activate this threat response, which can frequently show up as really challenging behaviors. So I talk a lot about sort of trying to implement what I sort of call high autonomy parenting. And, the reality is there are demands in life. I can lower the demands on myself professionally as much as I want. I work alone. I choose not to employ people, so I don't have the demands of, keeping up with employees, paying people, things like that, because I don't like those demands. I do still have to pay rent on my office. There are some things I have to do. I'm a clinician. I have to document my work, things like that. They are very real. No matter what field you go into, there will always be demands in life. And so I try to balance this with families. And I encourage families, look around, where are the opportunities for you to offer autonomy to your kids? Especially if we just talk children, who frequently, children are the people who have the least amount of autonomy. And so if someone's at school all day, elementary age child's at school 7 hours. If they ride the bus to and from, they may be gone from home 8.5 hours. If they're in an after school program, 10 hours. And yes, there's some chances in third grade to run around and play. You after school program, maybe you do your little homework sheet. You may be an hour in the gym playing, but within some constraints. And so people get home and they need, and this is sort of everybody, I think, but some people more than others, they need space to just let go and have full control of themselves. And so this is where I start looking at the high autonomy parenting approach. I encourage people, look for these opportunities. And it doesn't just mean like, well, your kid gets to choose whatever they want to do, but it might mean, okay, let's say your young person is going to play video games. There's some video games that have a storyline that you have to follow. Well, these are demands that they can't flex on. And they get more dysregulated. A kid's going to play Fortnite and unexpectedly someone, kills them and they take all their gear. And like, this is a full on loss of autonomy. Nothing they can do is they watch that happen. Contrast that to Minecraft that has a creative mode. That if a person wants to build a treehouse, they can. If they want to build a castle, they can. If they want to bake a potato, they can. Like, in this world, they can do whatever they want in so many ways. That's so even towards like what video game may play for a little bit after school, if for parents that may listen, your kid gets home from school and you've got this chaotic moment and you're like, I just need a moment. Maybe you pick your kid up from school, after school program or whatever, you get home and you're like, I just need to get my own brain settled. So is it bad to use a screen for a few minutes? Absolutely not. Is it maybe something I would encourage you to do, to find an activity that's letting this child, this young person, make a lot of choices, right? This is, you know, hygiene, safety, things like that. There's not a lot of flexibility. We need people to bathe. We need people to brush their teeth,
Right.
things like that.
Right.
And so if we can balance out those demands with autonomy, why does it matter what pajamas your kid wears?
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's these places that, if your kid wants to wear their comfy shirt instead of pajamas that you bought for them, sometimes, hey, we let that one go and let them have that one. Pick your battles where you dig in. But I think around these boundaries of, it's sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs around like safety, the first and foremost, like that. We want to make basic needs, health needs met as we build up these boundaries, but we balance them out by giving autonomy. And on the weekend, can we give them more space to play whatever they want? Do they need time to play a game? Do they need to get outside, run around? Do we let them choose? Do we let kids choose their meals a little more often? Traditional parenting says, nope, whatever we cook, they're going to eat, and you're going to eat your plate. And like, well, I get that sometimes. But there are other healthy foods, and we find balance in this. And some days, if it's been a busy week, flexing a little bit more on options like that can go a long way to settle that brain. When I have control of my own choices, I feel a little bit more settled. So, of course, so would a child. Again, boundaries in place. We want them to feel safe. So we look for these intentional places where that's your choice. If your child has 2 kinds of toothpaste and they choose which one they want to use each night, who cares?
Right. They do, right?
That's
And
right.
they do. And isn't that the magic? You can give them the opportunity to choose, and it's $3 out of your pocket, but you're going to use all the toothpaste anyways, and they get to feel that autonomy. And I love reflecting on what you're saying. I think the traditional old way of parenting was, well, if they don't follow this rule, they won't follow that rule. So they've got to follow all the rules. They've got to conform. I want them to be good. I want them to be successful, because when they go out in the real world, they won't be allowed to make choices. Whereas I think the more realistic thing to say is, listen, we get fatigued when we don't have choices. We all do, right? We go to work. We have to check all the boxes. And then if we're really exhausted, if we had a really exhausting day, we may go home and get out a TV dinner, even though we know that's maybe not what we should eat, because we're exhausted, right? We can't even make a salad. We need that TV dinner that's our favorite comfort food. Maybe it's mac and cheese, and we need to sit and watch a 30-minute documentary on seagulls because we love seagulls, and have no one give us any trouble for it. And as adults, we do that, right? And we recognize that doesn't mean we're going to eat TV dinners every night for the rest of our lives. It doesn't mean our diet's totally wrecked. It doesn't mean that we sit in front of the TV every night, right? It doesn't mean we watch TV first thing we come home. It was what we needed in that moment to help us feel our autonomy and our personhood again after a really difficult day where we didn't feel like we had space for ourselves or for our choices. But we need to reflect on that and say, okay, if my child's been away for 8 or 9 hours at school, making no choices or very few choices for themselves, can I gift them that time at home to make choices? Just observe what happens. Do it in a safe way. They're not going to harm themselves, right? And just observe how it changes our home environment and how they feel.
I love when we guide people towards reflection, right? Over our own experiences. If you give that opportunity to your child, reflect over their experience of it. You can, with your own child, reflect over what was their experience of that. Um, that's healthy parenting for helping our children better understand their own internal experiences. As we work towards regulation, the next step with the family is to start working on helping their child over time understand what's going on within their bodies. Right, we're going to give children autonomy. So we're going to teach parents how to do some co-regulation. And help kids through that learn what are they experiencing on the inside, what is their experience. And honestly, many adults, we weren't trained, our generation was not trained and taught to have this full internal connection. But as we work towards raising new generations. We learn this as adults. We help children, and I think if we go back to the question of like 5 or 10 years from now, where are we going to be?
Mm.
Where are we going to be when more and more people grow up learning to have self-reflection, and they're adults? How many more social norms will be questioned? That the ones we're going to hold on to, the ones we won't, things like that. But as we guide kids, yes, it may be more challenging if you open your children up to some self-reflection and hear about their experiences. That's in some ways more difficult, but it's encouraging growth. And yes, there's times, and I'll say this: I work with a lot of families that will identify themselves as neurodivergent families who kind of this is the whole family experience. I have families who they will say, yeah, even our dog, and they will give examples of their dog. I'm like, okay, fair enough. And so, yeah, to the whole family to have these needs. Because usually if one person in the home has a certain kind of need, the whole family does, right? And it's sort of these, I get countless examples, families on vacation or they go out to dinner. Like, why does everybody have to stay at the table to pay the check? Why can't one adult wait and pay the check while another adult goes and walks to the park with their kids? Or, things like these are needs. Like, why do we have to say, no, you can't go anywhere? Because we're all waiting on them to bring their credit card back. Things like that. There's so many little opportunities that, like, why not go to the grassy area you see out the window and let the kids run around for a minute?
Right.
Let them do it.
And do we want to force them into our world, or do we want to let go of that and join them in their world and reflect on the time that we spend in their world and which was more fun? Was it sitting at the table because we should? Or was it when we went out and we played and we pretended that the goose poop in the yard was like a bomb or something and we're like, making it this big silly thing because we stepped outside of our world and we step into their world and we just have joy there and we just let go of all the shoulds, what we should do, and we just really allow ourselves to enter into our inner child and be there with our child in that moment.
Yeah. Do you need to go play tag with the kids in the grassy area?
Yeah.
Because you might, right? You might.
Yeah. And we all do, right?
Sometimes.
We should play more often. It's a good opportunity when you are focusing on taking a step back, reflecting and thinking, how can I meet my kid more in their needs? How can I maybe incorporate art into our evenings instead of interrogation? How can I incorporate a family project that's just fun instead of just doing chores? And what is that going to open us up to? So if I don't interrogate my child, but I just sit and we do art and there's no structure to it, we're just, doing their favorite medium, we're just painting together, they're going to naturally feel safe and open. And the conversation will flow out of them because they don't have that block of the demand that they're focusing on and they're just open. So I love this idea of coming up with playful and creative ways to connect with the ones that we love and meet them where they are. And not only will it benefit them and help them avoid dysregulation, avoid that fight or flight feeling, but it's probably going to help us avoid the same.
And they learn that they are more important than those dishes that are sitting in the sink right now. We reinforce that. There's a lot of really weird and interesting research, I think, on like neurosynchrony and when we are in movement and motion with others. And so, yeah, you start playing with a child, play catch. We move with somebody, we get in rhythm. This is where like drum circles, things like that. It's fascinating stuff. The connection and the safety that can come from that and the impact on the nervous system. And so especially if someone at home has had a tough day, a kid, one of the parents, whoever it may be, some of the movement, some of the free flowing, the artwork, things like that, it can be very powerful, and we can give some really strong messages to children through those actions on our part.
I love it. I love this conversation. I love all of these ideas and how we can connect better. And these ideas are not specific even just to when you are learning how to communicate and show up better for your neurodivergent loved ones, right? Like these are just how we should connect as humans with one another.
I tell people all the time that the one thing that I like the most in the DSM is with autism, it talks about support needs. Except the problem is, I think it's not just autistic folks that have them. All humans have support needs. And the better that we understand each other's support needs across the board, every relationship would be a little bit better if we understand our own and if we can communicate those to others. But if we understand the support needs, the very real support needs of those in our lives, partnerships can be stronger. Parent-child relationships can be stronger. Every relationship, friendships, when we understand those very real support needs, because everybody has them. No matter how strong a person thinks that they are, they actually do have support needs. And if you think you're that strong, you've probably been ignoring some needs that you have internally that I think most people in my field would encourage you to stop and reflect and meet some of your own needs, because you're worth it.
That's so beautiful. And I think also such an opportunity to lean in and listen and to provide that support in a non-judgmental way, because we receive that so seldomly in our lives. And the gifts of providing support, it just becomes this beautiful cycle of learning how to connect better as people. I am so pleased that you were able to join me. And I want people to know how to learn more about you, about your mission, about your book, about your social media presence, your content, your speaking engagements, consultations, everything. You are a very busy man and you have an amazing message of advocacy and affirmation. How can listeners find you?
The easiest place to find me is to go to Instagram at Sam Marion Counseling. That's where I'm most active. That will take you to all my different websites. I've got them all linked there. Another profile I've got, but just to keep it simple, at Sam Marion Counseling on Instagram, all my content, all my links, you find them all right there.
Awesome. Website, I want to put that in there too.
Neurodivergentspot.com is the website. And again, that is linked from the
Excellent.
social media.
Awesome. And getting your book, where can people purchase that?
It's on Amazon. Embracing Our Brains on Amazon. Also, I've got that linked on my website, neurodivergentspot.com. I've got the book on my website. I got a few other products that are linked back to Amazon, just things that I use in my office. People see those at times. They're all little, if you're like, hey, I'm a fidgeter, things like that, some that I highly recommend for, I recommend them because they're all on my desk right now. I use them.
I love it.
Type thing, but for regulation purposes, I've got a few different resources there for free, just things out there for people as well. But, you can find me. Happy to be a resource. I hope people will reach out, engage, connect. Love it, all of it.
Sam, thank you for being so generous with your time and with everything that you have learned, and being such an advocate for affirmation and for people who are neurodivergent. I so appreciate you, and I'm excited to continue to follow along your professional journey and see where it goes, because I just think you're an amazing light and people will really benefit from your advocacy and the content that you have online. So thank you again for everything you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. And thank you to our listeners for being here. Sam told you how you can learn more about him. And of course, that all will be in the show notes as well. Please stay safe and take care. I'll talk to you soon.
Everybody's lonely, but you can hold on to me, and I will try to make it right. Everyone needs something. Let me be that one thing, and I will try to ease your mind. I can't bear another moment. I'm getting on clear. 'Cause there's nothing